Hello, and thank you for joining me for this week's Weston 101. I'm Piper Goodeve, Director of Education and Artistic Associate here at the Weston Playhouse. Today we're going to talk about Buyer Cellar by Jonathan Tollins. Buyer Cellar will play at our other stages at the Weston Rod and Gun Club and will be directed by our producing artistic director, Steve Stettler, and will star Kyle Branzell from last season's Murder for Two. Buyer Cellar is an outrageous and also poignant play about the oddest of odd jobs and the price of things. We meet actor Alex Moore, who has taken a job as the only employee in a basement mall, created and owned by Barbra Streisand. In need of a day job, Alex is hired to sit in this underground mall all day long, waiting for the famous patron to make an appearance. She eventually does, and what happens next, well, you'll just have to come back to the Playhouse this summer and find out. Buyer Cellar began in downtown New York City at the Rattlestick Playwrights Theater in April of 2013. After rave reviews and packed houses, it transferred in June to the off-Broadway Barrow Street Theater for a 10-week run, which eventually turned into 6 months. Actor Michael Urie, who originated the role, left the show at Barrow Street in May of 2014 to launch the national tour. He was replaced at Barrow Street by actor Barrett Foa, who Weston audiences will remember from our production of Gypsy in 2001. Buyer Cellar has won numerous awards and is continually on top 10 lists in publications and websites. In 2013, it was nominated for Drama Desk, Outer Critics Circle Awards, and Drama League Awards. Barbra Streisand published a coffee table book called My Passion for Design in 2010. It's filled with photographs of her Malibu home, and underneath a barn on the enormous property is a basement that holds all of her things: dolls, gifts, antique clothes, and all of the items are displayed in small rooms that have been designed to look like little shops, even with a little street leading to them. When playwright Jonathan Tollins' husband brought this book home from the library one day, Jonathan was fascinated with it, and after reading it cover to cover, he asked, "How'd you like to be the guy who has to work down there?" And so the inspiration for Buyer Cellar had begun. The New York Times said of the play, "Buyer Cellar could be called inconsequential, ultimately amounting to little more than the anti-aspirational message that who we are is more important than what we acquire. But as a reflection on all of us, struggling to make a perfect little world to fit our life into, it's a seriously funny and remarkably sustained slice of absurdist whimsy on which both Barbra lovers and haters will be sold." I sat down with director Steve Stettler to talk about Buyer Cellar and this idea of creating a perfect world that we all try and fit into. So I want to start first with why you chose this play for Weston.
I love the play. I mean, that's kind of why we choose everything for Weston. I saw it during its off-Broadway run, where it was quite a sensation, and was completely taken with it. And as is our wont, contacted the licensors immediately to say, when's this going to be available? And we had to wait a year or so. But, it's got, I think, the two essential things that we look for in everything that we choose for Weston is a good story, number one. And we want a piece that says something about our humanity. We don't want something that is lightly, purely entertaining, but doesn't leave us with, if not a message, at least something a little meatier and more to think about. And I think what's wonderful about this piece is that it is so very funny and works really well, just as a delightful 90 minutes of comedy. But beyond that, the old English teacher in me could give out, 6 different thematic assignments of other things that are investigated in the piece that every time I read it, make it more interesting and I think more pleasurable for me and the actor, and obviously, hopefully for the audience.
So obviously, as producing artistic director, you have responsibilities for helping to choose and shape the entire season. But then why specifically did you want to direct Buyer Cellar of all the plays?
There's not a simple answer to that, because we generally choose the season because we're all excited about and invested in all the pieces that for one reason or another, we feel like this is the time to bring to our audience. And we're pretty unselfish in first looking for that wonderful mix and then looking at who's best poised or most available to do it. And inevitably there are, with newer work, sometimes there are people attached to them already, or there are projects we've already been discussing with a director who wanted to come to Weston with something in particular. So, you know, there's a lot of things that dictate that. And there's nothing in the season that I wouldn't have been delighted to direct, but thank goodness don't have to. I think, you know, I landed on this particular one just because I really like the play. And I honestly, as I was thinking about bringing it to Weston, I thought, I think Kyle is the perfect guy to do this. And I had a ball working with him last year, so it would be fun, you know, to do something else. So that was really the essence of it. This is still an early stage in terms of my own thoughts about the piece, but I think that right now for me, what's most at its center is this idea that the single character who tells the story discusses about how we each create our own utopia. And for those who don't know much about the piece, obviously it's this somewhat out of work LA actor who gets this job, this strange job in Barbra Streisand's basement, and comes into contact with this, you know, incredible star. And the eccentricity of what she has built and gathered in this place is first intriguing and then kind of alluring for him, as is the contact with her. And he begins to see that what she created was an attempt, as is true with much of her art, to make a perfect world where there wasn't one before. And I think doesn't immediately make the link that he's doing the same thing by having taken a casual job that turns into something that puts him into a world that he hasn't been able to get into in Los Angeles otherwise. And then there's a real journey to the piece where he's kind of expelled from the land of Oz, spoiler alert, and has to reckon with that and decide what that's going to do for his life. So it's got such a wonderful shape to it, but both of the main characters in the piece are, in a sense, going through that same struggle of how do I construct a world around me that's more ideal than the one that I live in every day. And I think that's a fascinating thing. It's something that all of us are involved in doing at certain points in our life. And he, as he was envisioning this piece, it was inspired by this book that she wrote, and his husband actually brought it home to him, and they started poring over it, and then they hit this part about this, shopping mall of little village stores that she's created in the basement of her barn. And he became so fascinated by that, and his first comment was, well, what would it be like to be the guy who has to run that for her? And of course there isn't anybody, but that imaginative leap inspired first an essay, I guess, that he wanted to send to the New Yorker, which the New Yorker never picked up. Then he put it on a blog, and then a friend of his saw it and said, this should totally be a play. So, it's a wild construct, but it's based in reality. And then we take that imaginative leap with the playwright and with Alex as he tells us the story, and they make quite clear from the beginning that he's not going to do a true Barbra Streisand impersonation either. And I think he plays 5 or 6 characters over the course of the evening. Those transformations are a bit more subtle than they were, say, in Murder for Two, because you really want this sense that a great storyteller is telling you a story and giving kind of his essence of the characters without totally becoming them. And that's part of the key to what the playwright wanted, which is that we make that investment with him and bring to it our own experiences of what we imagine Streisand to be and what it would be like to be with somebody famous like that. So again, I think it creates this wonderful connection between actor and audience and material and imaginative journey that can make for really, really good theater.
Yeah.
You know, the play deals with a kind of class consciousness that in this play is largely based on the entertainment industry. Here's a largely out of work, aging younger actor who hasn't been able to break into the business.
Aging younger, I like that. That's a
well, you know,
new term.
I mean, it's important. It's important that the character of Alex Moore, who tells the story, is not bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and just come to LA or just decided to make his way in business. You know, that he's been at it enough years, and it's not quite working. That he's really looking for anything that's both going to pay the bills and make him feel closer to an industry that seems to be constantly closing the doors to him.
Yeah, I think the description that the playwright uses is north of 30.
Yeah, which I think is honestly metaphorical. I think the age isn't important, but it's the life experience and the professional experience and where you are in that journey. Most of our friends who get to their late 20s and have been pursuing theater, if it's not starting to happen by then, most of them start to think, is there something else I can or should be doing? So I think he's at that point. And then you've got an icon like Barbra Streisand who, to the best of my knowledge, hasn't really created anything recently other than political parties. But, you know, is a huge...
Concerts,
occasional, but very rare concerts. So, you know, she's at the top of her career, but also kind of removed from it. And he's, you know, not at the bottom, but kind of scrambling to get in. And so the two of them coming together is, I think one of the reviews talks about a kind of upstairs, downstairs, you know, quality, which is also, I think, really interesting. And, you know, it looks at our, let's face it, we all have a fascination with the rich and famous and with, you know, popular, iconic figures. And I think the play, because Alex Moore is so winning, kind of gives us the fantasy with him of what it would be like to become kind of secret friends with somebody like that and invited into their world. So there's so many, I mean, I could go on and on. There's so many things going on in it, which are really cool. But again, also, thankfully, also deeply entertaining. The first words that he puts in Alex's mouth are, or virtually the first words are, this is all a fiction. You know, I'm sure there are probably legal reasons for that too. But he's you know, he's deliberately sharing the artifice before it begins and saying, you know, I don't really exist. I'm just a character, and this playwright wrote it, but you don't care about him. And what you really care about is the imaginative journey that he took and that we're going to take together into this famous icon's world. And let's go do it. You know, it's very important in the theater that you set up within the first moments of a production what you're asking of your audience and how you want them to go on that journey with you. You know, one of the most famous stories, which I'm sure you know about that, was when they were trying to get Sondheim's musical Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum It's now, I think, probably still his most popular piece because it's the funniest and the most accessible, if not perhaps the greatest art of everything that he wrote, but still, you know, a darn good piece, and we've done it multiple times for that reason. But they had an opening that was just a kind of an innocuous song about love is in the air, and nobody cared. And then Jerome Robbins came in and created this number that we now all know. It's a better song too, Comedy Tonight, but it totally showed you what the experience of the evening was going to be, that it was kind of a return to vaudeville, that it was all these fun things that are about theater. It was not just some lovely, fairly forgettable song about the fact that there was love in the air, when the piece, in fact, was not so much a romance as it was a farce. You know? So literally by adjusting how they introduced the rest of the piece to the audience, they saved the piece. And I think Toland's was very smart to start this by kind of saying, okay, no, there's a few things you need to know before we start. I'm not a Streisand impersonator, and I'm not going there. And I don't even really exist, and all of this is a fiction, but it's such a darn good story that I can't wait to tell it, and I'll bet you're going to enjoy it. And I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
you know?
and by setting up all those rules, then you release everybody from feeling
Yes.
like, am I supposed to think this is funny? Is this
Right.
not supposed to be funny? Then everyone's on the same page and then can
Exactly.
just enjoy it
And
and take it in.
I hope it's kind of an icebreaker for the actor too, because I think probably the hardest moment in a one-person show is just coming out there, and especially in the Rod and Gun, you can see everybody,
Right.
and they can see you,
Yeah.
and just how do you get beyond the artifice of here I am being somebody else in front of you, and you're watching me, and I can see you in ways that I can't when there's bigger lights in my eyes and I'm further away.
Right.
So I think it may help the actor as well as the audience in kind of starting off on a note of connection and agreement, and then we're off. You and I were discussing earlier that we've done a lot of one-person shows,
Yeah.
primarily in the Rod and Gun Club, but we had Seringatry on the main stage,
Right.
and
Fully
we
committed.
like that form because in many ways it's kind of theater at its essence. It is a good story well told, and this kind of direct human contact with it, and we almost more than in larger plays kind of become the other character in the play, and usually the power of the writing and the actor's portrayal demands that we supply the rest of the imagination to see the whole world. And I like that kind of theater. I like it when we I think of the David Copperfield that we did some years ago, or other productions we've done that are very storytelling related and let an ensemble of actors morph into a lot of different characters. And part of the reason for asking Kyle to do this is that he and Ian were so wonderful and so well received in Murder for Two last summer, and Kyle having the part that required the transformation into 12 different zany characters really showed that ability, and to provide these kind of entertaining personalities, and at the same time to kind of tap the humanity that was underneath that. So there were, I think, genuine moments in Murder for Two, as zany and wacky as it was, where you actually cared about the characters and the relationships that were developing. So I know he's going to be able to, go there with this character too.
I'd love to hear your thoughts about that space. You've directed a bunch of plays over the past, I guess it's been 12 years, maybe?
Something like
that.
Yeah. Our temporary second space.
Exactly. And I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that space and what it's been like to direct so many different, wildly different productions over the course of that time there, and how different each production is able to become in that space that shouldn't necessarily work, right, for theater, but how that intimacy can
well, and that, I mean, intimacy obviously is the key, and what we're proud of in the proper theatrical space that we're now creating at the Walker Farm is that it will still have that intimacy, and it will actually have an even greater flexibility, which was the other thing we were looking for in a second space, even a temporary one, because we adore and hope never to leave our main stage at the Weston Playhouse, but there are limitations to trying to move it in any way beyond conventional proscenium theater, and some pieces would just work better, if not in a more intimate setting, at least in a three-quarter setting or an in the round setting or something other than proscenium. And that really was the inspiration for the whole Other Stages series when it started, was to provide a complement to what naturally flourishes in, for us, a larger proscenium theater, and to provide different kinds of actor audience experiences for our audience within a season and from season to season. And you know, that series started up at the Church on the Hill for 2 summers, and then we spent several summers in that 35-person, you know, delightful Victorian bar room at the Vermont Country Store's Bryan House restaurant. All of those are somewhat improbable theatrical spaces, but theater didn't begin in a theater. It began in public spaces where shared storytelling flourished. And so we've been able to prove that that can be done. And since it's taken this long to get a more proper and permanent space for that, we've been blessed to have the use of a space like the Rod and Gun Club, which if you drive up to it the first time, you don't know quite what to expect. And when you walk inside, you're still not quite sure. And then you're taken on that journey. So, you know, I think we'll miss the funky intimacy of it in some way. But I think we'll be able to capture that intimacy in a stronger way for more material, because we are limited in what we can literally fit into that space. But Mal, Tim, and I have all directed multiple productions, and happily so, in the Rod and Gun Club. And I think the artists who've been involved there, both actors and designers, have learned to love it, you know, in the way that you kind of love your eccentric relative who isn't all that you want them to be, and yet are so special that time with them is precious.
Well put, well put. And you learn something about yourself too, I think.
Yes, well, that's theater, isn't it?
Exactly. Can you talk a little bit about the process of directing a one-person show versus a huge cast? I mean, obviously you have just people management, but what do you do in terms of preparation that you would do differently if you had a huge cast versus the one person?
That's a great question. I mean, I learned something years ago when I was observing the director Garland Wright directing a very large production at Arena Stage in Washington. And when he got to 2 character scenes, the first one in the piece, he said to the actors, "I never stage a 2 character scene. Just, you know, go to work and I'll select." And it wasn't so much about 2, but it was the idea that when there's not a lot of moving parts, as a director, you don't so much need to be a traffic cop as you need to be a filter for the audience. And so it's a different kind of experience. It's not that responsibility of an opera director, you know, who's got to put all these bodies on stage and make sense out of the total story and make sure that each of them knows what their role is and that you control it in a way. If you let them literally do what they want to do, it would be, you know, total chaos. Scenery's and probably not very clear storytelling and very unsafe. So with a one-person show, I think it's important to find, even more so than a larger cast, the ideal person who can bring so much to it, and then kind of agree with them on where you're going, but give them a lot more latitude to play and explore, because they're also not going to have those other actors to play off of, you know? So you don't want to lock them in too soon. You don't want them to play the game of pleasing you too early. You want to agree that together we're going to experiment and explore and decide. And that it's thankfully my job rather than theirs to make the ultimate decisions, but hopefully we'll both feel good about them and we'll make them to some degree together, but where they need somebody to take that responsibility, you know, I'll take it. So I would say that's the big difference, is that there is a kind of refreshing ability to get in a room with somebody terrific and good material and just kind of find out where it's going and make those decisions as you go. I will have some ideas, but I'll probably have less ideas than I would in a larger play in terms of actual staging. I might have some ideas about interpretation, but I want to be sure that I give them an environment in which they can play. And if we find that we need something that we didn't anticipate and it's affordable, we'll add it during rehearsals, you know? So it is a different experience, and it's at its best, it is deeply and satisfyingly collaborative. It is not authoritarian,
Right.
you know, much at all, really. And yet, we're ultimately shaping it and making the decisions, which I hope every actor wants to some degree. I personally, and we as producers, love the form. And as one looks back over the many delightful one-person shows that we've had, they've been some of the highlights of our seasons, as much as we love a big splashing musical too. I think it reminds us all what it is about live theater that's different than what we can get electronically, quite honestly.
Definitely.
And that human experience of being in a room with somebody who's telling you a good story and having to supply some of it through your own imagination. One of the problems that I have with some film that's being done now is that there's so much they can add to it with computerized art and all the rest of it that literally there's no room for your imagination anymore. It is almost over-realized,
it's all just coming
and
at you.
to me feels over-realized and a little bit fake. And I think in theater, it's a little bit more like reading a book. You can supply some of the details, and in fact, I think you get a richer and more invested personal experience from it. And what you hope happens in theater and doesn't happen when you're reading a book alone at home is that you're also having that as a communal experience. So everybody in the room is involved in making what will only happen that one time, because as we both know, it'll be different every time in a live performance situation. So one-person shows in particular really get to the essence of that because they depend on it. And I think that's one of the biggest things about it, and one of the things that we love about it, and what must be, not having had to do one, thank goodness, beyond curtain speeches, terrifying, for the actor who has to do it. So God bless them for being willing to get out there and hold the stage. One of the things I love about this piece, the dedication to the play, is to the playwright's husband, and I should get the exact words, but and it comes from a line in the play, which I assume is his own construct, but I don't know. But it says, "For Carrie, who knows what to do on Sunday," and as you know, there's a moment between Alex Moore and Streisand where she's talking about the many men that have been in her life, and that while some people wondered why she stayed with one of them so long, that the reason she did is that when you've got all this glitz and fame and control and the business, it's sometimes hard to just deal with the moments that aren't that and to fill them properly, or to be as alive in them as you are in that other, not terribly real, but all-encompassing world. And that what she loved about this guy was that she never knew what to do on Sunday, which is, not just Sunday, but basically I never knew what to do in downtime. I never knew what to do when I wasn't that persona, when I wasn't that controlling figure making this great work of art. And he always did. And one of the things that Alex discovers in the journey of the play is his own need to be able to fill that human gap. And I think that's a very beautiful construct, and it's funny and quirky, but very true, and kind of captures the essence of what's so good about this play, is that there are those witty, unique understandings of humanity that, while they come from this rather rarefied and semi-fictional relationship that really never happened, nonetheless can speak to us whether we've had any kind of experience like that or not, because they are deeply human.
What do you hope that audience members leave this production thinking about and feeling, or what do you hope they take away from
Well,
this
I mean, first
production?
I hope they just have a really good time and they tell all their friends to come, which is honestly what thankfully happened with Murder for Two last year, and has happened with many other pieces like this. I think of very different pieces, but people that still talk about The Oath, which was a totally new play that we did. Dale Orlando Smith's very special and sometimes dangerous and disturbing work. I am my own wife. You know, no child. You know, there's so many examples of that just from the canon of plays that we've done. But I also hope that there's enough things going on in this play that people can latch onto, whether they've ever been in LA, ever known anything about the business, that are just, again, deeply human. Our desire to create and control a better world or place than the one that we feel like we're living in a lot of times. The human naivete of thinking that somebody who is richer or more famous is necessarily ultimately any happier than we are, or any less human, or less subject to, you know, frailties. You know, there are just so many things I think that it tells us about life that we'll leave with a richer experience, because they'll say, I had a really good time, but also it's a play that left me with some things that will stick with me too. So it's not the old cliche of a Chinese meal where, you know, half hour later you want another meal.
I don't know if I've ever heard that cliche
Yeah,
before.
well, you're not old enough, but that was the 50s Chinese food.